If it goes right, it's a slice. If it goes left, it's a hook. If it goes straight, it's a miracle. This is Out of Bounds. If it's happening in the world of golf, we're talking about it. Coverage, debate, discussion, pro golf and local golf. Let's do it. This is Out of Bounds. And here are your hosts, Nate Sharman and Josh Durso.
The final week of the PGA Tour regular season is in the books, and we are talking playoffs. We're talking Graham McDowell's failed drug test and perhaps some changes to the way the FedEx Cup playoffs operate. Nate, let's get right into it and start with that wild finish at the Wyndham. Some big numbers coming down the stretch.
Yeah, Josh, just a crazy week on the last week of the PGA Tour. We kind of thought we would sneak into the playoffs. Nope. We started with a crazy weather delay, right, from Tropical Storm Debbie that impacted down there in North Carolina. Didn't play any golf on Thursday. So we started the first round on Friday, and then we had to play catch-up all week. They ended up playing a marathon on Sunday to get that round in, and everybody but Matt Kuchar finished on Sunday night. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, just a crazy scenario. It looked like Max Grazerman was in control a lot of the day Sunday. He then knocks one in from the fairway. I believe it was on 14 to give himself a 4-shot lead. Then he makes a quad. And yeah, there it goes. And Aaron Rai gets the victory, his first victory on tour. Aaron Rai played very well. Max Grazerman didn't just give it to Aaron Rai. Aaron Rai went out and shot a bogey-free round of 64, including a birdie on 18 in the pretty much pitch black, right, Josh, to get that victory. So big win for Aaron Rai. He's a really cool player, Josh, because he's so unconventional. You know, he wears those two weather gloves all the time. It could be beautiful, 90 degrees and sunny, and he's wearing two weather gloves, two distinct black weather gloves. And that's very, very different. You don't see a lot of players do that. And he's got iron coverage, Josh, which a lot of people don't like that. A really cool story from Aaron Rai, though. Sorry to go long here on this one, but as a kid growing up in England, Aaron Rai's family was, not a very wealthy family, pretty poor family, and his father saved up enough money to buy Aaron Rai golf clubs, buy Aaron Rai some new irons. And he I don't know if he forced him to use the iron covers or how that kind of went about, but Aaron Rai kind of still kept that mantra to use these iron covers and show that these are very expensive irons and ones that we need to take care of. So, Josh, we can blast them all you want for using iron covers, but that story is pretty darn cool to me.
Yeah, and I can't help but think that, us golfers are a little bit superstitious. And at some point through that whole experience, I wouldn't want to change the mojo. Wouldn't want to change it.
Yeah, and it's just pretty cool to pay homage to, to your father, to your family, to show that, these values and these beliefs that you learned as a young child that you had instilled in you still follow to this day, even though you've made millions and millions on tour this season. Aaron Rai hasn't made a ton. He has grinded on mini tours a lot in his life and has shown that he has those beliefs in him to get to where he is. And now he's kind of gotten to the mountaintop. Pretty cool.
Yeah, it definitely is. And what a jump. A guy who, he's had some close calls this year. Like he's been in the hunt and he's been around, but jumped all the way to 25th in the FedEx Cup points. So, he's 22nd ranked player in the world. I was shocked about that. I was like, really? 22? He's the 22nd best player in the world. But yep, he is. He's put together a pretty impressive year all told. Like he's got 6 top 10s this year, and he's 4th in strokes gained on the PGA Tour. Scottie Scheffler, Xander Schauffele, Rory McIlroy, then Aaron Rai. That is some sneaky, good, consistent golf if you're really like looking at the whole season.
Yeah, and it's just amazing from Aaron this week. He's really knocked on the door, especially the second half of the season. Josh, you mentioned those top 10s. And it was just cool because Max Grazerman sort of had control of that round, right? Especially before that eagle and before that quad, he really kind of was cruising. And when we saw him kind of, making some good putts and some short game opportunities, Aaron Rai could have just kind of, played regular golf and sort of finished this round, right? But he doesn't. He puts it in fifth gear and shoots a bogey-free 64 and puts himself in the hunt, and then gets on 18, a very tough hole, makes birdie and gets the win. So pretty good stuff from Aaron Rai. But yeah, Josh, what a week from these guys over on tour to finish up the regular season.
Yeah, and as far as Max is concerned, you have to feel for him, right? Like, and just hope that back nine doesn't stay with him long. You assume that, golfers at that level have to have a super, super short memory. But, this is something that, we've seen this theme play out a few times this year. Winning at the highest level is so, so hard. We heard Akshay Bhatia talk about it openly I want to say it was about a month ago now, how winning is just really difficult and how the pressure sort of got to him a little bit, or he felt it coming down the stretch. Playing in any PGA Tour event, whether it's elevated, a signature event, a major, or just a run-of-the-mill tour tournament, it's a pressure cooker. And performing coming down the stretch is really, really hard. And, you just hope that Max can get back at it and, be a player here and, show the rest of the world that this last week, those 9 holes, or really it wasn't even 9 holes. It's more like 5 holes was the exception and not the norm.
Right. And he had a really cool quote after the round, Josh, that he stayed around for the interview, right? And they were sort of talking to him and sort of saying, what are you going to take out of this week? And he said, basically, I played really good golf for 31 holes today. They played close to 36 holes on Sunday. Yeah. Just those 4 or 5 holes where he kind of had a blank. He had that quadruple bogey, and then he had a 4 putt on 17. So just a couple little mental errors, I think. But he really, really twisted the interview in a positive and showed that, I can play out here, and I've showed myself that I know how to play golf at the highest ability that I can. And Josh, they kind of asked him too, how are you going to move on from this, right? And he goes, I'm going to go home and hang out with my wife, pet my dog, and keep it moving. So I thought that was really cool for Max Grazerman to kind of show where he is and where his head's at after that disappointing loss.
Yeah, and let's not forget either. Playing 30 plus holes is unusual, very unusual, especially for the final round of an event like that. So,
talk about the mental grind on that too. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I just think there's an opportunity to forget more quickly because of the circumstances that led to Sunday, because you're talking about, 27 or 30 great holes and just a few that were unfortunately not his best. So, it is what it is. We could have finished actually on Sunday, as it turned out, if not for Mr. Matt Kuchar, who decided he did not want to finish on Sunday at 8:00 after he was out of contention and just needed to hit 3 more golf shots. He said, no, not for me. I'll come back tomorrow. What do you think of that?
Yeah, what a wild scenario. It looked like we were going to finish on Sunday, Josh. It seemed like it was very dark. I mean, sunset was around 8. I think it was 8:12-ish on the East Coast, and it was around 8:20 when Matt Kuchar decided to pick it up, right? So he hits his tee shot on 18. He hits a wild tee shot, and before that, Josh, he hit when the Aaron Rai group, the second group out, was still on the fairway in 18. So you could tell Matt Kuchar wanted to get done, right? Because if he is able to hit his tee shot on that final hole, then even if they blow the horn, even if they don't do anything, they have the option to finish.
Yep.
And so we were thinking that's why Matt Kuchar ran up to the tee box on 18 and hit. And then he hits this really wayward shot, Josh, and ends up putting a mark on it and saying, nope, I'm finishing tomorrow. And it was really peculiar because the rest of Matt Kuchar's group, Max Grazerman, and I believe Chad Ramey, finished out on 18 and got done with it. Max Grazerman was sort of out of it by that chance. He needed a birdie on 18 to tie Aaron Rai, and play the playoff the next day. But Matt Kuchar picked it up and came out on Monday and made par and kept it moving.
Yeah, I understand that it, I guess, is within the rules because it was after sunset technically. So apparently there is once the official sunset time passes, they can quit at any moment, even if there hasn't been a horn blown.
They call it a theoretical horn, Josh. They don't actually, for some reason, they didn't actually blow the horn, but the theoretical horn is what they called it.
A theoretical horn. I guess from Kuchar's perspective, it's the lack of awareness for me that stands out, because it's like everyone's played 2+ full rounds of golf. Everyone was doing everything they possibly could, not just the players, but support staff, the tournament director. Everyone is doing everything they possibly can to get it done. And then to throw a mark on it when you're out of contention and you're the only one who's going to stop playing, just to come back and play in 6 minutes the following morning and say, I'm sorry if I, offended anybody or if I bothered anybody. it's just insane. Like the lack of awareness is insane to me.
Yeah.
And, for all of the silly rules that we complain about the PGA Tour having or professional golf having, the fact that there is not some kind of guidance for this type of scenario, as outrageous and unusual as it might be, it is kind of crazy, because this just should never happen, period, ever, under any circumstances.
What's crazy for me from Kuchar is that he needed to win the event to get in the playoffs, right? He's had sort of an up and down season and found himself on the outside of the top 70. Josh, even if he marked it and made a 2, maybe he knocked it in from where he was, Josh, he wasn't going to win the event. That was already cut and dry, right? The only person that could win the event was Max Grazerman. He needed to make birdie to tie, and he didn't, right? So I think I would be very understand if Kuchar hits his ball in the fairway and he needs to make birdie to get in a playoff, and he marks it and calls it Monday, because he wants to be able to hit that approach shot in the light and be able to putt in the light. Putting in the darkness is very difficult, right, Josh? So I think I would understand it there, but he was a couple strokes out of it at that point. He hit a very wayward tee shot. I'm interested why he doesn't just hit and make a 4 or 5, and what's the difference at that point, right? I mean, Kuchar's a guy too that people like Matt Kuchar, I think, but people don't at the same time, because he's had some scenarios where we've had the story about him not paying his caddy the allotted amount, right? So there's already that sort of that cheap moniker going on about Kuchar, and then he does something like this. That's not a great way to look at fans, not at all.
Yeah, I sort of look at this as, if you're not in contention, you shouldn't be able to do that anyway. To me, I hear what you're saying with regard to how he steps up there and he hits, and Rye hadn't even actually hit his approach shot yet, and he basically just hit into them. Like he wanted to finish, like he wanted to get it done. It almost felt like a bit of frustration to me. Like he was annoyed that they were even still out there playing, and he just ran up there, basically hammered his drive, hit a bad drive as a result, and then out of frustration just said, I'm not playing anymore today. That's how it felt. That's how like the situation felt to me. But maybe I'm, looking at it through a certain lens too closely. We're never going to know what his real reason was for doing it. We just know he did it. And I just know that it should never happen again, at least from my standpoint.
I do agree a little bit with Matt Kuchar that it is a little bit silly to play, that much golf in one day and to finish in the darkness like that, Josh. I think there's too much money on the line. There's too much points on the line this week, especially this week. I mean, the final week going into the playoffs that can make or break a career, right? So I think maybe we look at this opportunity. We didn't play any golf on Thursday, so why do we need to squeeze it in on Sunday? Maybe we plan on playing, 27 holes and having that remainder of 9 holes to play on Monday morning. We can go out on Monday morning at 8 o'clock and start then and be done by about 10:30. So I think that could be an interesting lot to look at, not just let's try to get it in today and let's have a plan to how much golf we're going to play today and be able to have the final holes in the light, right? Because I think it makes a huge difference for these guys especially on the green, right, Josh, when they're putting. But at the end of the day, Josh, I know I can say all that, but Aaron Rye dealt with the same exact conditions. He played in the group in front of Grazerman and Kuchar and played in the dark just like those guys did. So at the end of the day, I think any ideas like that are moot point, because Rye did the same thing.
Yeah, and I also think there's hesitancy from the PGA Tour, because you don't. Everybody thinks like, well, you have until Thursday until the next tournament, but the work has to start on Sunday night probably to begin really in earnest after you have the results from that weekend's event, getting ready for the following week. So it's tough. There's a timeline too that I'm sure is really seriously considered when that sort of dilemma crops up.
And I mean, it can be really different on tour some weeks when they have to fly across the country to get to the next event. But the next event's in Memphis. I mean, how far? I don't know my geographics of the South too far, but I don't think Sedgefield, North Carolina, and Memphis are crazy far.
But it's the playoffs, and it was the end of the regular season, and I'm sure that had something to do with it too. Hey,
definitely, Josh.
Let's shift gears here and talk a little bit about this failed drug test. So we had over the weekend, Graham McDowell posted to X.com that he failed a drug test. That was where he put out his official statement. He essentially described a scenario where he mistakenly took some cold medicine, although I don't think it was a mistake that he took cold medicine. If you're feeling under the weather, you take cold medicine. There was something in it that was a banned substance of sorts on the Live Tour, Live Golf. It violated. He was drug tested. He failed, and he accepted the consequences. I know, Nate, you sent it to me, and I know you don't have too many thoughts about it, but drug testing in professional golf, what a touchy subject. There's been so much debate about this one since his statement on Saturday.
Yeah, and I think I don't have a ton, Josh, but I think there needs to be a line somewhere, and I think it's really sad that this happens to be like this, because we've seen this story in other sports too, right? Where I believe there's an NFL player on the Bills a bunch of years ago who was on marijuana to help with Crohn's disease, and he failed the drug test because of that. So I think that's unfortunate, Josh. But really, I'd look at the statement, and there's three words that pop out to me. He starts the sentence with "unlike other tours." So he's just taking a direct shot at the PGA Tour. So I think that's the biggest thing I looked at when I read through that statement.
Yeah, and that definitely, that was sort of like one of two things that stood out to me. So it's like, on one hand, you have the jab at the PGA Tour, which you knew he was going to drop in there, and you just kind of take that as like annoying. I was like, okay, that's just annoying. But then, I think about how drug testing works in professional sports in general, and honestly, that's pretty annoying too, right? Like, everyone talks about, there needing to be a line, and that it's, fair and it's random and this, that, and the other thing, but it's random more than anything else. And
very random, yeah.
I don't know anyone who's looked at Graham McDowell in my lifetime and said, that guy's juiced. He's using performance enhancing drugs. It doesn't pass the sniff test, I guess. It doesn't pass the eyeball test for the casual fan, for anybody really. And it seems like it was a genuine mistake. And I just hate, and this is not just a golf frustration. Sports in general, sports that do randomized drug testing throughout seasons. I don't like seeing guys get dinged for taking something like cold medicine. It's just weird. Like, I know you have to draw the line somewhere, but if you're going to have a drug test policy, which I understand there are substances you have to test for, test everybody on a regular basis. Or, like, this was the one thing that I was thinking about, test everybody in the top 10 every week. If that's going to be, because what are we really talking about here? We're talking about performance enhancing drugs that could potentially change the outcome. Well, if you're in the top 10 and you test positive for whatever performance enhancing drug, then that could have very well had an impact. If you finished, T59 in a cut event, or you missed the cut completely, I don't care if you're taking performance enhancing drugs, because it didn't enhance your performance. It actually maybe eroded it. So, I guess I would like to see more consistent testing and not so much reliance on the random testing, and then getting away from this whole, concept of, if you have a sinus infection or something, or if you have a cold or whatever the case may be, there are so many over-the-counter medicines that people take. And the reason why there are so many is because they all work differently on different people. And, I just had a cold, using myself as an example. I had a cold just a few weeks ago. And for about a week, I had to try different medicines before I finally found an over-the-counter one that actually worked on the symptoms. So it's like, it's way too complex to just have these sort of generic, vague rules around testing and around what substances are and are not approved under what circumstances. And it just, I actually think the leagues end up looking worse in these scenarios than anything else, because what do people know? People know that Graham McDowell took cold medicine, and now he's gotten dinged by Liv for violating the substance use policy. It's crazy.
If he did just take cold medicine, right, Josh, and believes he's in the right, then why didn't he fight it more? Was there an appeal process that happened with Graham McDowell? It seems like to me, I know I'm not keen on the situation, that he just kind of took this sentencing, right, and didn't fight it. So that sort of throws up a weird flag for me.
Yeah, I also wonder what the actual consequences are.
Maybe he did appeal and I missed that. I don't know.
I didn't see is he out for the rest of the season? as a result?
I believe it was. I think it was no. I think it was a retroactive. It was either retroactive from last live event, or he's not playing in the Greenbrier. I'm not sure. I can't remember this time. It might have been a retroactive penalty.
Yeah. So I mean,
it was a 1 week penalty, if anything. So it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's a slap on the wrist. Do you appeal that as a 50-something-year-old guy? I think Graham McDowell's in his 50s. Do you appeal that as a 50-something-year-old guy on the, on live, where it doesn't really matter if you play another event or not because you're all set, you're good. I don't know.
If you believe you're right, I think you appeal it in my just from the looking at it that way too. And we know that there's a lot of money floating around on live too, and he's got teammates implications too. So I think if you think you're right, Josh, at the end of the day, I think you're appealing it.
That's fair. Okay, so let's get back on track here with the PGA Tour and get into the playoffs. Playoffs begin this week with Scottie Scheffler taking an absolutely mountainous lead into the St. Jude. Xander behind him, Rory even further back, Colin and Wyndham round out your top five. I think the most interesting criticism or talking point we've seen online is that, some major cities are continuing to be left out of the playoff schedule. Would you like to see maybe some Chicago action, or perhaps New York or Boston or some other major cities in the U.S. Get a shot at FedEx Cup playoff event?
Yeah, I think what would be interesting too, Josh, is in every other sport we have the playoffs, right? We have the Super Bowl, we have the NHL playoffs, any MLB playoffs that move around, right? It kind of matters what team is in it, but maybe not the Super Bowl though. The Super Bowl is always predetermined, and we always seem to play the FedEx St. Jude at TPC Southwind in Memphis, and we always seem to play the Tour Championship at East Lake in Georgia. And those two things, I think they've done a nice job branding East Lake as the finisher event, right? So I think that's a good job that they have that there. I don't have a problem with that. But yeah, TPC Southwind in Memphis is a very good, very fun golf course. I think it is a good golf course to play in, Josh. But at the end of the day, they're both in the southeast and in similar areas, right? So you're gonna have very, very hot temperatures at both these tournaments. And I don't know. I would like to see these tournaments, this first FedEx St. Jude sort of move around. But FedEx St. Jude does play a vital role in the Memphis community, so I think that's part of it too, Josh. So I think there's a little bit more going into that, than we think. But yeah, Josh, at the end of the day, Chicago, Boston, Philly, not necessarily in the playoffs, but we do need to see these in the rotation a little bit more. They are going to go to Philly next year. I think because of the PGA Championship being at Quail Hollow, they have to move the other event, so they're playing at Philly next year. So that's a good thing. But yeah, Josh, it's crazy to me that they don't go to these big major market cities more often throughout the PGA Tour schedule.
Yeah, I mean, personally, the criticism feels warranted because I like to try and compare the PGA Tour to other major sports. And if any of the other major sports in America here had the opportunity to choose where playoff events were going to be taking place, because home field advantage wasn't a thing, there is no home field advantage in golf, they'd jump at the opportunity and they'd choose the biggest markets over and over again. We would never see an NFL playoff game played in a place other than New York, LA, or maybe Chicago if home field advantage wasn't a thing. So, I just look at this as a pretty big missed opportunity, and hopefully the criticism results in some kind of change. To your point, I don't necessarily think this is exclusively a playoff problem. I think this is a full season problem. There's a lot of time spent in Texas. There's a lot of time spent in Florida. There's a lot of time spent in other parts of the country that I think the tour could be much more methodical about choosing big markets to capitalize on for some of these big events. It happens to some degree with the majors, right? So we've got control, or the governing bodies of those events have control over that, the ones that move. But, the playoffs really, I think, should be it should be set. And I think it should be a test. And if you're going to keep East Lake as is, I don't love it, but if you're going to keep East Lake in the rotation, you at least have to go to major markets the 2 weeks prior to that. You just do.
Yeah, I agree, Josh. I do think, like I said, they have done a nice job branding East Lake as the finisher, the race for East Lake. and they've done a nice job with that. But yeah, Josh, at the end of the day, if we're going to talk about PGA Tour schedules, you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to bang the drum for Oak Hill Country Club in Rochester, New York. It's what I'm going to continue to do, and no one's going to stop me there.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and that's I think that's a really, really, really good and underrated point, because one of the things that we keep talking about after the US Open and the PGA Championship every year is sort of this identity crisis that both are somewhat going through. To a lesser extent, the US Open, but the PGA Championship is this, you have a Valhalla year where, 20 under wins, and then you have an Oak Hill year where 9 under wins. And places like Oak Hill that were at one time US Open venues and aren't really anymore, they're left on the outside looking in. And especially as the PGA of America sort of reevaluates what it's going to be moving forward, what the PGA Championship's going to be moving forward. So those venues, I think, are perfect, using Oak Hill as an example, are perfect for the playoffs. And yes, to your point, I think we were talking about it before we came on today. Like, it's really hot in the Southeast. I'm sure those guys would welcome the opportunity to come up to New York, where, yes, it could be warm, but it's not going to be 105 degrees and 100% humidity for 4 consecutive days like it will be and very well could be on any stretch in August in Georgia or any Southeast state.
What do you think about possibly changing the format up of the playoff events? I mean, we see 72-hole event, stroke play events all season, and then we continue to do it in the PGA Tour. Daniel Rappaport, Barstool Golf, he mentioned match plays as a possibility for East Lake. Josh, what are you kind of thinking? You mentioned it as an idea, no concrete plans to do that. What do you think about possibly changing up that idea, maybe as we get into East Lake, when we get into that less than 30 number of guys? Do you think it could be beneficial? Do you think it'd be fun? What's your take there?
You know what? I think it would be great, because just a 30-man stroke play 4-day event, I think, is kind of tough. It can be very exciting, or it could be an absolute snooze fest. Right. Scottie Scheffler could win this thing by 12 strokes, because he's going to enter it with a lead. Scottie Scheffler entering a 30-man event with a lead, to me, feels like the biggest lock in the history of locks. So I think that needs to change. I'd like to see, I know you're not a huge fan of this, but I'd like to see one more playoff event, especially because, short of that 30-man event that is the tour's finale in the playoffs, really what guys are chasing for now is that top 50. They want to get through to the second to last playoff event, because it guarantees them status for the following year in signature events, which really the PGA Tour has gone all in on. So, I would almost like to see, and this is a criticism of the elevated events, or the signature events, excuse me, and we've talked about over and over again, 70-man fields is not enough. I'd like to see those elevated to 90. I'd like to see 90 players in those, and then use that as your first playoff event. So the Wyndham would be the first playoff event at 90 player cut, then go to 70, then 50, then 30. That way there you build some tension up to that 50, because as it stands right now, we're just going to have this week and that's it. Like, it's just going to be this one week quick in and out. But the drama to 50, or to the conclusion of 50, could actually be more exciting than the finale itself, right?
Yeah, for sure. And
I mean,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
And I think that idea is a good one, Josh. And I think that'll happen in the next few years when live players are welcome back on the PGA Tour, right? We'll go to 90 and we'll expand that, right?
I certainly hope so. Yeah, because the implication, and
sense
even for, people love to talk about, especially over the last couple of weeks, you're talking, you see it when you're watching the non-elevated events, these up and coming players who aren't household names, they're fighting. They're really, really fighting. Like, most casual golf fans probably didn't know who Aaron Rai was before this weekend. And, like, now they do, and he's in the mix. And, last week and this week and next week are going to be immensely consequential for him, because, he jumps into, I believe, the mid-20s.
25th, I believe. Yeah, so he's 25th. Going to East Lake at this point.
Yeah. And, if he has if he just has a couple decent weeks, he just keeps it under control, he will, you know, he will be a household name by this time next year because he will have played in all of the signature events. And, you know, you get in the mix a couple of times and people know who you are. So, you know, the implication of the playoff structure and how the regular season is set up, building to that top 50 cut, it's significant. And I think it's a real opportunity for the tour in terms of building some better brand awareness and excitement for some of these guys that aren't, you know, they aren't your household names that everybody already knows.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. It's going to go through a lot of changes in the next few years, especially with Liv coming back to figure that out, Josh. But as we see this now, as we see this top 70, who are you looking at as possible surprises that got into the FedEx Cup and maybe who was left on the sidelines as we look at the FedEx Exchange next week?
So I actually, as far as I'll go with my most surprised in, and maybe this is a bit of a criticism of the way elevated events are so heftily counted when we're looking at the playoffs, but it's a tie between Will Zalatoris and Jordan Spieth. Neither of them were necessarily super close to that top 70 cut line, but, and certainly no disrespect to either of them, but neither had very good seasons. And from like a contextual standpoint of their peers or for themselves, I know, you know, Zalatoris is just coming off of an injury, and in a lot of ways, I think this was kind of a buildup year for him. But you know, Jordan Spieth just had a poor year overall. Didn't play well really at any point, and here he is. He's like safely in the playoffs, and he very well could safely be in the following week if he just plays slightly better than average, and we won't look at his season any differently.
He's got to play okay. He's got to play pretty well to get into next week. But yeah, he's hinted at off-season surgery, right, Josh? So for that wrist.
Yeah.
So probably going to do that, and then he'll probably miss the President's Cup. Who knows if he would have been picked anyways. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting for Jordan Spieth. Yeah.
Yeah, and my part of my issue there, I think, is like, even if he plays well enough to get through the following week, it's not going to make us, unless he literally won, it's not going to make either of us sit here next week on the show and say, boy, Jordan really had an impressive season. We're still going to look at his season the exact same way. So that's why I think, in my mind, that's why I'm sort of sitting like most surprised in, most disappointing performance. What about you? Who do you have for your most surprised in?
For me, it's Victor Hovland. I mean, we've talked about him all year as having this weird down year, right? I mean, Josh, he lit the world on fire last fall. You know, He won the FedEx Cup and just absolutely teared it up, right? And then played well in the Ryder Cup. And then we looked at him this year and we said, wow, he's going to maybe contend in a major. He has contended in majors in the past, maybe win a major. Who knows for Victor Hovland? And then this season, Josh, more missed cuts than top tens. 3 missed cuts, 1 top 10, and he's played in all the elevated events, which are all no cut, tournaments. So he comes in 57th place in the FedEx Cup playoffs, and it's just like, wow, for a guy like Victor Hovland to look at those numbers, which we talked about how elevated events have helped these guys' numbers, and Victor Hovland still on the outside looking in. Next week, he's got to play well to get inside the top 50 to keep going through this FedEx Cup playoffs. It's very, very intriguing to me.
Do you think a guy like Victor in a season like his sort of exposes some deficiencies in the system itself?
Yes, definitely. I think you can look at Victor Hovland and see that. I think you can look at Jordan Spieth and see that too, right? And kind of show that, we get in these elevated events and how just by getting into these events and having a little bit of name recognition, we can see where these guys are getting their points from, right? Because, they can hit it almost backwards in these elevated events and they're going to gain FedEx Cup points, right? Because there's no cut. So I think that part is a little bit interesting, Josh, but I just go back to how the PGA Tour is evolving so much. Not everything's going to be perfect. We're going to have to get the kinks out. But at the end of the day, too, Josh, wouldn't you rather see Victor Hovland and Jordan Spieth in the playoffs than Bo Hostler or, I don't even know, not Max Grayson, he's in, but, Davis Riley or something like that, names that these people, common golf fans know. They know Victor Hovland, they know Jordan Spieth, and be able to watch them and see them. So at the end of the day, Josh, is it really a deficiency for the product?
I struggle with that because, like, here you have a scenario where he's the 7th best player in the world. I just had to look that up to confirm, but he's the 7th best player in the world, and he's on the outside looking in terms of like the top 50. But if you're really taking the format, the season and playoff format, I think the way the PGA Tour intended it to be was to have this hybrid between allowing guys that are, hallmarks of the game. I'd call him a hallmark of the game at this point because he's one of the best young players on tour, with also this possibility of relegation. So here you have a guy who is completely out of form. He is completely out of whack. His game is lost and gone. And does he necessarily deserve to be right back in all of the signature events next season, even though he's going to be there most likely because of his world ranking? It's weird. Like, it creates a weird scenario.
It sure does. Yeah. I would lean yes, just because of the name recognition. That's where I'm going with.
Yeah. And that, I think at the end of the day, maybe everyone would feel more comfortable with this scenario if we just all said it out loud and said, we're more concerned with name recognition in big events than we are necessarily who actually are the best players. And that when you're thinking of it from that frame of mind, all of a sudden things like Victor Hovland having one of the worst seasons you could possibly remember of a guy who's in the top 10 in the world begins to make sense. It makes sense that, he is still going to be there next year no matter what. Most surprised out, I had Bo Hostler, your man, Bo Hostler. Because this year, it's interesting. He's ranked just under 90th in the world, 85th. He wound up in the actual FedEx Cup points. He only had 2 top 10s this year and 6 top 25s. Last year he had 5 top 10s and 14 top 25s. So I looked at this. Yes, he hasn't won, but to his standards historically, this was a bad year for him. And, for a guy who hasn't won, he's always been very consistent. And to lose that consistency the way he has and the way he did, to me, is kind of like a pretty big hole to compensate for, right?
Yeah, it's interesting with Bo. I was looking at the sort of standings and sort of what the projections were before the event, and I saw that he needed a top 3 to get into the playoffs, right? So I immediately texted a friend and said, asked if we should bet on Bo Hostler top 5. And so we kind of laughed about it. And I think I thought about it, but he goes out on Friday. Remember we didn't play on Thursday. We had that rain out Friday morning, and he lights the world on fire, Josh, right? Shoots 60 and has a chance for 59 and to have that historic number on the PGA Tour, but ends up shooting 60. Josh, then he just kind of just pedals a little bit and goes forward, then backward, then forward, and kind of finishes right around that number, Josh, outside the top 5, and does not make the FedEx Cup playoffs. So we really looked like a guy like Bo Hostler, who I liked rooting for, who was fun to watch at Texas, right, Josh? We've always kind of had a soft spot for. We're not going to see him in the playoffs.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm looking at Lucas Glover, though, who finished at 77. I mean, last year,
you're still close.
He went crazy last year and won the Wyndham, and they won the FedEx Cup Championship. We talked about Lucas Glover possibly making the Ryder Cup team, right, Josh? And now he's missing the playoffs in the next year. So a little bit sad, right, to see that happen to a guy like Lucas Glover, who was a really fun player to watch on tour and a really good guy too. Gets a lot of good marks on that side. But yeah, gained so much momentum at the end of the year last year and sort of flaked out and finished at 77 on the rankings.
Yeah, lightning in the bottle, and that's kind of what that finish for him was last year. It's interesting because we may have a scenario where none of the defending champions from the playoff events are in the field. We're not going to have it this year, right? Or this week, because he won the St. Jude last year. Glover did. And there's a scenario potentially where if Hovland doesn't play well this week, that he's not in the field next week. So
that would be very, very intriguing.
The
battle between Xander and Scottie is going to be a lot of fun to watch at East Lake.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's going to be really, really cool to watch. And the fact that they're leading by so many points, you kind of forget that there's other people involved. But then you remember it matters where you are in terms of the top 30, right, Josh, for seeding in that tournament. But you could be down by 5 points. You could be down by 2,000 points. You're still only down a couple strokes. There's no change in what you're looking at. Scottie's going to start at 10 under, and Xander's going to start at 8 under, and then whoever's in third place is going to start at 6 under. So it doesn't matter where they are and how many points they have. They're still going to start at that number if they're in third place. So they could theoretically come back.
My question for you, if somebody says you can have Scottie with the lead heading into that event, or you can have Xander, Rory, Ludwig, or Wyndham together, which would you take as a bet?
Oh man, it's hard not to take Scottie with the lead. Give me Scheffler with the lead.
I'm completely with you on that, because it's so, I'm sorry, but like, and there isn't a scenario, I don't think, where he won't have the lead. Like, I don't even think Xander could go out and win the next 2 events leading up to Eastlake. I still don't think he'd have enough points to get to the top, because Scottie's going to be getting.
If he wins them both, he probably gets. I think they double him. So
do they
get a ton of
okay.
points?
Yeah. So it's just it's one of those scenarios where Scottie with a lead in a tournament. It's funny because didn't he blow a lead a few years back in the final round the year Rory won?
Yes. Yeah, he blew it to Rory. Yes.
My God, you want to talk about a changed man?
A different player now, though.
Holy
That's
cow.
prior to the major championships and the billion tournaments he's won, right, Josh? Since then, so. I mean, I'm interested to look and see, if this position does figure out and Scottie has that lead, what's he going to be in the odds? He's going to be close to even money to win the golf tournament.
Is it going to go the other way? Could it potentially go the other way?
He could. He could be. Yeah.
I mean, we've seen him like what, plus 250, plus 300, plus 350 in majors. Give him a lead.
Very well could be minus negative or favored money to win the Tour Championship. It could happen.
I mean,
we'll see how these weeks play out, though.
Give him a lead. You never know. Hey, that is going to do it for this edition of Out of Bounds. Follow us on TikTok and Instagram for more this week. And remember, whether it's down the middle or out of bounds, keep on swinging.
You've been listening to Out of Bounds. If it's coverage, debate, or discussion of pro and local golf, we'll be talking about it. Be sure to visit the website. Find us on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. See you next time on Out of Bounds.